Hi everyone, welcome to Exploring Health, Macro to Micro. I'm your host, Parker Condit. In the show, I interview health and wellness experts around topics like sleep, exercise, nutrition, daily physical activity, stress management, mental health, and so much more. By the end of each episode, you'll have concrete, tangible advice that you can start implementing today to start living a healthier life, either for yourself or for your loved ones. And that's the micro side of the show. The macro side of the show is having discussions and conversations around these larger systemic issues that contribute to health outcomes. However, today's show is more focused on the micro side. So we have a very narrow focus on stress, heart rate variability, and how to use wearable devices and data to your advantage. By the way, heart rate variability is often abbreviated HRV, so I wanted to call that out now, as you'll probably hear that abbreviation quite often throughout today's episode. My guest today is Greg Elliot. Greg is an exercise physiologist, osteopath, entrepreneur, and co-founder of HealthQB Technologies in Vancouver, British Columbia. He's an HRV and wearable technology thought leader, speaker, and sought-after healthcare practitioner. This episode is more cumulative than many others. So we start the episode talking a lot about stress and the nervous system to get a baseline understanding so we can do a bit of a deeper dive or a more in-depth conversation around HRV. Later, we get into specifics like how to measure HRV, how to apply a holistic approach to your overall health, the best wearable devices on the market, and how you can start taking more ownership over your health with very practical and tangible advice. This is a longer episode, and this was a fun conversation for me because I've had a lot of questions about HRV for many years, and I just haven't had a trusted resource up until this point. So for that reason alone, I was thankful to have Greg on the show. In addition, he's a great communicator of scientific information, so for anyone who is just even remotely interested in health, I think this is going to be a very fun show for you to listen to. So without any further delay, please enjoy my conversation with Greg Elliot. Greg, I'd love to start just with getting a better understanding of the BioPsychoSocial Model, because I think intuitively a lot of people are going to understand what this is, but if you could just break down how exactly you think of this, I think it's going to be a great primer for the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, this has been, the BioPsychoSocial Model has been kind of a new model for a lot of people, especially in the general public of how to look at health. And I think the difficulty is we look at health right now very siloed. We look at these each individually with our medical system, with the allied healthcare system, with just kind of wellness areas. And so these are each kind of broken down. The biopsychosocial model looks at the biological, psychological, and social factors that can impact health. And we're starting to realize the importance of each of these areas. The medical system primarily deals with obviously the bio side of what's going on, your biophysiology of how to best optimize that. And talk about psychiatry and clinical counseling, talk about the psychology around that, and the social aspect as well, where you get into some health coaches and life coaches, the kind of these different areas, and it's very siloed. But what the biopsychosocial model tries to show is the fact that each of these areas are interconnected with one another. We can work on our stress management. It will impact our sleep and our energy levels and how we connect with other people. We go out and we have a great social event, how that turns around our mindset around those various areas. I think for so long, individually, you look at the beginning of time of making sure that we're physically healthy. We had a big emphasis on, eating right, sleeping well, and being physically active. And then, probably the last 10 years or so, we had a big push into the mental health, how the mental health, plays a gigantic role. And what I kind of say about the pandemic is, we had an unbelievable social experiment happen at a specific time where our connection with individuals was taken away from us completely, the way that we know how to communicate and the way that we interact. And we saw, and we will continue to see the devastating effects of that to our health and well-being as the years go on, not only immediately, but for the long term when you remove primarily the social component of our health. And there's more and more evidence around the social determinants. So the biopsychosocial, in a nutshell, tries to show that the fact that you can't look at any of these conditions or any of these kind of factors of health in a silo. They're all interconnected and they all can impact one another.
Yeah, that's great. So I think a lot of people are probably familiar with terms like holistic approaches or integrated approaches. This is just sort of a cleaner definition, I think, of those various aspects that are getting all considered when you're looking at health as a whole. So I guess what are the effects that we're dealing with now in the U.S. healthcare system of not having this approach or this system in place up until now?
Yeah, it's people start to be able to feel loss of what to be able to do. A lot of health agency has gone from individuals of what to do. You're right. You have people that suffer from depression. You talk fibromyalgia. These invisible illnesses that we talk about that are being so prevalent now that we don't have these kind of objective tests to determine differently than hypertension or cardiovascular disease that we can objectively define and saying yes, this person has this condition versus no. We rely on these subjective analyses and I think people don't feel validated. I don't feel heard by the medical system because there is these no tests, and so they kind of fall this wayside of what do I do in that standpoint. It's kind of disheartening. And majority of my clientele base is in the invisible illness space, the chronic fatigue syndromes, the fibromyalgias, the PTSD, and this is where everything kind of falls in line. And taking this type of approach of saying, there's other areas of health and well-being that aren't necessarily addressed for you that's outside of this medical system that can best help you. I think that you're starting to see these medical clinics incorporating, psychotherapists and health coaches. Health coaches are now, insurance companies are recognizing how beneficial they are, and they're starting to be able to cover some of the costs of these health coaches instead of seeing the benefits. We're going that way. It's slowly, the thought leaders are starting to introduce this a lot more. But as we know, with anything to do with healthcare and science in general, it's just going to take a long time to trickle down into into the mainstream and knowing what to do exactly about it.
No, it certainly is. But that's why it's one of the biggest things I get out of doing this podcast and talking to people like you. Until the major institutions are going to be adopting this, it's going to have to be driven from individuals. And I think a big part of that is education and understanding what exactly it is you need to care about. Because at the end of the day, your doctor is going to be looking out for you, but you have to be your own best advocate. You need to be the champion of your own health. But health is
completely, and this is one
so
of the
complicated.
With a lot of my patients, I explain to them sometimes. It's like they see certain people and they're endocrinologists or they're internists. And I don't know if I should do that. I'm like, you have to be your own advocate. You have to stand up for what you believe in, what you need to do, because a lot of them just kind of they don't feel heard, or they kind of feel like, well, maybe I don't know what's going on, and maybe everything is okay. And you're right on the ball with that.
So you brought it up. Why don't we just kind of jump into that now? What kind of demographics do you generally work with on people individually?
Yeah, so it's typically my cohort is my caseload is very much into the chronic pain space, into the chronic fatigue, and those are visible illnesses, people that have been rejected by the primary care system. From there, we have a team around us of various allied healthcare practitioners as well. As the primary care, physicians, that's kind of the main focus. Now, a lot of the people are more in the physical active standpoint. They want to get back to some sort of physical goal, whether it's a race or event, or we deal with a lot of athletes that have a lot of chronic pain issues that are kind of either in currently playing professional sports or after professional sports, and so we deal with a lot of people in those areas with those diagnoses, but have more of a physical type of goal and objective to kind of go forward. So I'd say a vast majority is going to be the fibromyalgia, the chronic pain syndromes from there, but we do have quite a bit of individuals that suffer from PTSD, from depression, and just don't have the motivation or don't know what to do to be able to kind of get back to physically feeling well.
Yeah, people who are dealing with things like that, it's interesting because what needs to precede the other? A lot of people know what they need to do, but then when, if you dealt with depression, the simplest thing, getting out of bed, is a monumental task. Do you have a framework for how you think of health in a general sense within your practice? Do you have a simple framework that you can break it down? Because people, obviously, you've been studying health for probably most of your life, and you're probably like, oh, I could study this for the rest of my life and still not know everything. Do you have a simplistic model that you can give people to be like, oh, here are buckets you can think about, just a framework for people to wrap their minds around?
Yeah, it's and this is what's great, that I have a great team around me, which is obviously was able to indicate. And so one of the biggest things is the framework first. We have to be able to kind of get this kind of all out assessment into that standpoint, making sure that there's nothing kind of big red flags. From there, there's a lot of kind of testing that most individuals don't go through to find out certain hidden things that's going on with their physiology. But to me, what we try to be able to do is we do look at the biopsychosocial model and we do try to assess each of those areas, right? So we have that. And so when people come to me, in particular, say they're referred to me, my biggest thing is I want to make sure that these individuals are in the right room. I have certain tools in what I do, but I really try to hold a standardized assessment that what we do here to making sure that we're addressing all these type of areas. Now, personally, I have my own framework where if people are in the right room and we kind of go through that standpoint, I have a certain framework that I go. It loosely follows the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That which you talk about that type of framework, but that's also in conjunction. That's very objective view. It takes away a lot of the individual's goals and values into that standpoint. So I go through a list of based on the blood work that is done, based on the assessments that we go through of like what objectively, what do they necessarily need to work on, right? Whether that is their, some deal of physical deconditioning that's happened over the years and how to best go about that. There are some nutritional deficiencies, emotional regulation problems, or, we don't have any strong relationships. And so we have an objective way of looking at the biopsychosocial model from the various factors that we can impact through their behaviors. But then I got to sit down and be like, well, is this of value to you? Do you find the value of doing, say it is physical activity? Is that what they want to be able to start with? Do they feel ready to change in that specific area right now to kind of go forward in that standpoint? But if people are, ready to go, usually my framework starts with the physical activity standpoint. We deal with the nutritional side of things and the sleep as those kind of big three to kind of start that framework. But that's with me as an individual practitioner where we start making sure that's the right room for that individual at that specific time. That meets with aligns with their goals. That means in line with where they're physically at that specific standpoint. We also have, again, like I said, naturopaths, other doctors, health coaches, clinical counselors, acupuncturists, depending on what our assessment necessarily says is the right type of intervention and the right type of therapy for that individual.
That's really helpful. On the psychological side, I think it's easy for people to wrap their head around, I can lift this much weight. On the physical side, I average this many steps, I can run a mile. What sort of assessments do you use to try to quantify things on the mental health side? Because there are a handful of tools for anxiety, depression. Do you employ those? Are there any others that would be helpful for people to know about?
Yeah, from the objective standpoint, I mean, there's some subjective analyses when it comes to looking at those type of scales. Well, what we don't do too much of or hold a lot of weight in is more the diagnosis of people, right? Like, okay, well, if someone says has depression, great. Okay, does it not tell me anything about what to do with this individual, right? Very similar to someone has low back pain. Great, I don't know what to do with that. I need to be able to investigate as to why that's there. I don't have a lot of value into diagnosis of various things. So people go like, one of the things is like, should I get an MRI for this thing, right? And I go, well, independent of what that MRI says, it's not necessarily going to change what I'm going to do with you, really, unless the surgery indicated, unless there's a lot of red flags that happen from there. So from the psychological side, one of the things that we do employ a lot is the wearable technology, looking at various cardiac biometrics like heart rate variability, like heart rate for individuals, and look at those statistics. Which for us is a great whole health biomarker, and we see the impact of someone's psychological state through their heart rate variability, whether in the moment, during the time, or chronically, through nocturnal capture of that, to give us like a good overall hierarchical biomarker for these individuals that's easy to obtain, that's non-invasive, and that we can get direct feedback on.
Okay, so we're going to end up diving into wearables and metrics like HRV quite a bit, but I do still want to sort of set the stage. I think the easiest place to start is getting an understanding of how stress is sort of like run through the system. So can you start by explaining like what the autonomic nervous system is within our bodies?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of the major branches of the central nervous system is the autonomic nervous system. Best way to describe this is it's everything that we really don't consciously control. 80% of the autonomic nervous system is, going through digestion and dilation of various organ systems. And it's a lot of things that we don't consciously control. Some is subconscious, some is conscious, like breathing. You have conscious control, but it's also subconscious control as well. So there's some functions from that standpoint. We have two branches within that. Things that excite us through the sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight response, as everyone knows, is whether we're we eat, lots of sugar and our body's going through that stress. We're exercising like crazy. We have not a lot of sleep, or we're going through stressful times. that system ramps up. We know that with, sometimes feelings of anxiety, you got your racing heart rate's a little bit higher. You can feel the blood pressure running through your veins. You start to be able to see that sympathetic response, which we have a lot of these days. We have a lot of sympathetic innervation with all the access to information and all the things that our lives are now. And then we have our rest and digest, our parasympathetic nervous system, the way to be able to calm down and relax and be in the kind of a healing process. And what we have now is a very much an overdominance of our sympathetic nervous system, and not necessarily access to a lot of our parasympathetic nervous system, our safety mechanism, our resting, our being calm and relaxed and recovery. It's good to be in both of those states, but we don't want an imbalance of each one of those. And so we want to be able to make sure that stress is a good thing. That's why exercise is a benefit to people. We add this little stress, but it's taken away. We have the ability to recover from that. The typical term in exercise physiology that everyone says is you can never overtrain. You can just always under recover. And very similar with stress, where it's like you can't overstress yourself, but you can under recover from that stress. That's the key. We have to be able to bounce back from that. It's good to go under stress, but it's our ability to recover from that is significantly more important. And that's the key to what's going on. So we have these two branches of this where things are excitatory, things, to be able to run away from, as everyone says, run away from the lion, the fight or flight response. And then we have the rest digest for us to be able to recover from that, to heal, and to be in a nice calm state.
Yeah, so you touched on some really important points there, one of which is that stress is not necessarily bad. I think a lot of people have really negative connotations around stress, but stress is necessary for adaptation. So if you want to expand on that, the other thing that you mentioned is, along with stress, is that the sympathetic nervous system also is not bad, right? You want both of these to be able to mobilize energy, to mobilize norepinephrine in your body. If you're being chased, you want your sympathetic nervous system ramping up to give you that energy. But like you alluded to, it's the ability to, go into these states successfully and not just get stuck. So it's like signal and noise, if you will. But if you could expand on why stress is not necessarily bad, I think that is a point that is never spoken about enough.
No, and it's like, to me, it's always stress is your friend, right? It's super beneficial to what's going on, and in our ability to be able to, when stress comes on, our ability to maintain a stable environment is super important to our health and well-being. But I do this in a lot of my presentations, where I talk about, okay, well, I get into the stress talk. I go, okay, well, who name some positive forms of stress, right? And that type of stuff. And some people talk about, public speaking to a degree, or winning an award, or exercise, that type of stuff. I go, okay, great. And I go, okay, well, what are some bad forms of stress? People go, oh, poor diet and financial problems, or fight with your spouse and things like that. I go, completely agree. I go, absolutely, these are good forms of stress, the bad forms of stress. And I go, would it make sense if I completely switch these two and say it's exactly the same relevance if I completely switch them? Where I'm saying all those are bad stress, all these are good stress. Never kind of looks at me to confuse, like, what's going on? It's that type of stuff. And I go, it's about the dose response relationship of these. You could, exercise. Imagine exercising 20 hours a day, 5 days a week. That is not beneficial for us. That is absolutely detrimental to our health. And we wouldn't last very long on this world if that was the case, right? Very similar to winning an award all the time. All these different things, they're negative forms of this type of good stress. And it was also very, going through the bad stress in its dose dependent relationship can be absolutely beneficial. And then I provide the study that kind of people understand of how drastic this necessarily can be. It was the nuclear shipyard worker study. Have you heard about this one? Okay, so this was done by the Department of Energy, and it was looking at nuclear shipyard workers, individuals that were exposed to nuclear radiation on a continuous basis. And they had 3 different cohorts. They had one that was exposed to high dose radiation, which is they equated to about a few X-rays per year. They had a medium dose radiation, which is about 1 X-ray per year in regards to its amount. And they had the worker group that were not exposed to any radiation at all. And the sample size was 60,000 people. So 30,000 were controls with the 0, and then about split halfway in between in regards to the different cohorts. And then what they looked at is they looked at over 30 years, and they looked at any kind of mortality or morbidity in regards to the individual's cardiovascular disease, cancers, anything that would have a cause of death. What they found out was the fact that the people that were exposed to the most amount of radiation lived about 2.8 years longer than the control group. And the fact that they were less likely to develop the hemolytic type of cancers or radiation sensitive cancers like leukemia as a result. I feel, well, hold on a second. Because the dose response, the amount of radiation, right? Having 3 X-rays at a single time is a lot, right? But if you space that over a year time frame, right, it can actually be of benefit because this is a stressor for it's causing some sort of physical adaptations in individuals, but they're not exposed enough, right, over that time frame. It's caused a real distress because they have the ability to recover from that. So as a result of that, they were able to live healthier, longer lives in the cohort. Very similar to people that were exercising and not exercising. It's about a 2-year increase in life expectancy if people were exercising a minimal amount of physical activity versus people that were not. And so that's where people are like, oh my gosh, like it's about that dose response. It could be absolutely beneficial to have these kind of small doses of seemingly negative types of stressors if our body has the ability to recover from it.
Yeah, so that you very eloquently, through a story, explained the idea that you can adapt to certain levels of stress as well. It's all very adaptable and trainable. And I think one of the really important things, by the way, that's a fascinating study. I think one of the really important things is to have the right mentality around stress. And people do always carry this very negative connotation around stress. I usually try to make the distinction between distress and eustress. Distress being one of those negatives and eustress being sort of the positive stressors in your life. But yeah, gosh, that's such a good study. And like very eloquently administered as well. What was that from?
Oh, it was great.
Is that from the 1970s, you said?
Yeah, it was from the 50s to the 80s. They're looking at it. And I'll obviously, we'll attach it to the show notes and to that standpoint so people can read it through thoroughly. But you talk about like of all the things that you want from a study in regards to longitudinal studies. I mean, it's got an unbelievable, sample size, great amount of controls around the methodology. And you talk about all the tests that people had to go through the whole time. It was a gigantic study. And obviously, the Department of Energy was not necessarily too happy with the findings because the whole hope was the fact that they're saying, hey, when people are exposed to radiation, we need to be able to put some protocols in place at that point. But I kind of showed the opposite, and then it started to spitball as to why that is.
Yeah, it's also such an interesting metric that they were tracking, right? Like tracking radiation. It's not like you're tracking smoking, which is obviously one of those things where positively in the other direction, like exercise, like you alluded to. Radiation, it's exactly not the outcome you would have expected.
No.
But yeah, you got to love studies like that.
Well, it's great, but it provides that talking point. It's like, well, why is this the case, right? You talk about, like it's the same mechanism as to why exercise works. This is a mechanism of why certain, stressors of things, why we do sauna, why we do ice baths, like these little stressors that we possibly do. How can these things, which they, have this subjectively negative? I always use an example of like, if you did not know exercise worked, right? Really. And you say to the point of like, someone says, hey, you should exercise because it's healthy. And you go to the gym, you do these lifts, you do these weights type of stuff. Like you're going to leave there feeling exhausted. You're going to feel sweaty, right? You'll be super tired to have to go to bed super early. You wake up, you'll be super sore and exhausted and that type of stuff. They kind of go, like, you didn't know exercise was good for you. A lot of people wouldn't necessarily do it. Like it's subjectively, like it doesn't make you feel good really in the short term, but it's the accumulation over periods of time. And it's just like, yes, like, yeah, it's, you have to look at the holistic nature of, okay, well, what is the purpose of me doing this? And what are the necessary responses that come from it?
Yeah, that's a great comparison. I want to go back to your assessment where you said you typically start people with physical activity. Is there a reason you start a lot of people there?
And this is that's kind of my area of expertise when it comes to the osteopath and exercise physiology background. And this is like kind of, again, want to make sure people in the right room, right? So when people have that as either a goal subjectively or kind of fits one of those objective goals of we find that's the lowest hanging fruit for this individual, they typically end up in my room, where we have other people when it comes to, say, nutritional changes or any kind of genetic abnormalities, or we have sleep pattern issues or issues with relationships and connections with other people, or emotional regulation, or self-acceptance, or anything around those areas. We have these assessments that we kind of go through. We kind of say, hey, like this is the right practitioner or the right type of intervention for you. And so people call them in my room. It's not the fact that I don't address those other things, is that usually people end up in my room or within my clinic into this specific area, with physical activity being a primary goal for them.
Okay. So I'm just going to throw some categories out there at you, just to give people an idea of what I'm talking about. So if you were to take these buckets of like sleep, exercise, nutrition, stress management, and relationships or connection, is it the case where a rising tide lifts all boats, where if somebody is like maybe deficient in a handful of these categories, and one of them really needs to be addressed, but they're not ready to start there, can you just start with like meet them where they are and like start addressing that? It's probably going to help them in a variety of areas.
You see that all the time. Like people, like when it comes to, I had this one individual that was really early on in my practice, whereas he was a recently retired individual, was having some overall pain. He was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. Was on some certain medication, was just having a lot of joint pain over that period of time. One of the things is because of recent retirement, his purpose in life, he necessarily didn't have he was just kind of living and going, free flowing and that type of stuff. Our assessment highlighted that. And he thought I didn't think purpose was that because he had such a purpose. He was a high powered C-suite executive for many different years and didn't necessarily realize I guess I really don't know what my next part of my life is going to be like. And so part of that, we started to lay out the framework of what that is, what his values are in regards to living life, what is his legacy want to be able to be, and start to be able to write this stuff down and design plans. And because of that, he goes, for the first time in 5 years, I'm sleeping through the night.
It's remarkable.
Right. And you're completely right to the degree they may not be ready to deal with specific, areas of their health and well-being at a specific time, whether it's past experiences or trauma or whatever. But this is, again, the biopsychosocial model is the fact that everything is connected. You start to address one specific area, you will definitely see shifts in other areas, most of the time for the good, but sometimes for the bad into that. But it's be able to kind of look at the person as a holistic being and what's going on and realize it's like when you shift one aspect, and we'll do the big buckets. If you shift someone's psychology, how that can impact their connections with other people, as well as their drive and motivation to be more physically active and eat right and everything. And so all of these kind of intertwine and interplay with one another completely. So you're exactly on the ball with it, where you start to attack one area of someone's health and well-being, it absolutely is going to impact one, if not almost all the areas of that individual.
Yep. Yeah, as long as you actually end up addressing probably the root cause one at some point. But a lot of people, they just need to see progress early on. Like people have to get early wins, especially around behavioral change. Otherwise, the drop-off rate is astronomical.
Oh, completely. This is obviously, you see the retention rate is most applications is extremely low within a 30-day exam points, because it's like you got to be able to see that change, which is, I think, the benefit of, again, using both subjective and objective captures of things. I think the power of wearable technology and kind of that kind of remote monitoring and tracking is such a key aspect into behavioral change to get that kind of feedback that things are shifting in this and that, rather than, I had the story with one of my colleagues is went to get a whole kind of medical thing done. And he had a little bit of high LDL cholesterol. And the doctor goes, oh, well, there's probably some lifestyle changes and that type of stuff you should probably do. And Bo gave some recommendations. He goes, okay, great. When can I test this again? He goes, 6 months. Who do you know is just going to be, saying absolutely stingent into something and not know if it's necessarily working in regards to decreasing LDL for 6 months without any feedback whatsoever?
The people who are annoyingly healthy, but you need to that, but that's the mentality they have. And the
it's
average,
all going to be successful.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
And so you got to get that feedback for those individuals and get those early wins and realize, even small amounts of improvements in certain areas is having a drastic impact on my health and well-being. If you can get that feedback, both subjectively and objectively, follow that, it is an absolute game changer for a lot of individuals.
For sure. Yeah, I hopefully the conversation at this point for a lot of people has been people can see the issues with the existing U.S. healthcare system, where since all of this stuff is obviously related, like it's one body, right? Like it's all connected. But the system is incredibly fragmented, and getting people to talk to each other from even different verticals within the healthcare system is extremely challenging for a variety of reasons. But hopefully that's becoming clear at this point. I do want to move on now to actually talking about the main topic of this conversation, which is HRV, which stands for Heart Rate Variability. I think it's becoming a much more popular metric, which is great. But I think there's a lot of confusion and ambiguity around it. So I'll just leave it up to you. I'll allow you to start this conversation however you want.
Yeah, well, it's again, like I've done this elevator pitch now for the last 10 years. I've been utilizing heart rate variability since my master's degree in 2012, my master's thesis. I used it clinically since 2013, through this whole thing. So I've got a good, pretty explanation where the hiccups are for all this. Most people confuse, and then when you hear heart rate variability, they really do think of heart rate. They go, oh yeah, 60 beats per minute or 90 beats per minute. And people are very familiar with that. What provides significantly a lot more information is actually the frequency at which those beats occur. So say you and I have 60 beats per minute as a resting heart rate, where mine beats on a consistent basis on the second every second, right? The beats per minute is how many beats approximately is happening over that period of time. How many beats actually happen within that minute? Where yours varies, up and down at rest. It kind of goes up and it speeds up and it slows down in a nice kind of rhythmic pattern. What research is showing is the fact that you're in a healthier, happier, well state than I am. So we want more variability, which is completely counterintuitive what everybody thinks. Like, well, we want a stable system. You think of the term homeostasis, or ability to maintain a stable environment. They think it's like, well, you want that stability, you want that consistency and routine, which our body likes, circadian rhythms. It's everything in the cyclical type of nature. Heart rate variability is one of those abnormalities. So heart rate variability is the frequency which beats occur. We don't want our heart rate to beat like a metronome. We don't want it consistent. If it's consistent, this is indicative of a stressed state, whether physiologically, emotionally, psychologically, or socially, that our body is fighting something. It is in a fight or flight state more than a rest and digest state. And the reason why I find this number to be extremely valuable, and there's many different ways that it can be measured, but as I kind of alluded to, we have so much more ways to accumulate stress than ever before, right? Many different ways when we talk about, again, social media, the news, internet activity, the complexities around, society and money and all these different things that has been, almost bombarded us in a very short period of time. And so we have way more propensity to be in this very much a stress state. It's evident by the amount of burnout that's occurring in many different type of practices and practitioners, and exodus of very high demand jobs. People creating their own things and entrepreneurship around it all. Big shift into this kind of recovery state, that it's hard for us to get into that rest and digest state very often. To be able to recover from these things, we kind of stay in the sympathetic state, which we know now is linked to pretty much every chronic condition under the sun. Whether it's diabetes, whether it's heart disease, whether it's Alzheimer's disease, whatever necessarily may be, it's highly associated, having high levels of subjective stress with all these kind of chronic conditions. And so heart rate variability has been a fantastic metric, very sensitive metric, more sensitive than heart rate, of determining, is our body in a rest and digest state, or is it in a fight or flight sympathetic state?
Yeah, so that's great. What's the best way to measure HRV?
It depends really on what you're using necessarily for, right? So stress can come in many different ways. The big two are acute and chronic, right? Acute stress is doing this, talking to you, having to answer all these questions. There's certain things, obviously my heart rate's a little bit higher. So in this moment now, there's various ways that I can measure my heart rate variability to be able to say, hey, Greg, be in a calm state, calm down, it's okay. And be able to be more in a relaxed parasympathetic rather than, going super sympathetic. There's one way to be able to calm down. So you can do it in the moment. You can do it right now, saying, hey, is your body in a more stressed state, less stressed state? Let's do some mechanisms of various things, whether it's breathing, whether it's mindfulness or meditation, to be able to bring that kind of down so you're kind of more in a balanced type state. That is the chronic way of doing, and that's more the longitudinal type of measurements, which is kind of more popularized in the commercial space. In the medical research space, it's more in the moment, in that time frame, where they're at, the ability to be able to get a high quality signal. Then in the sports performance and the consumer basis, it's typically either first thing in the morning, which is kind of looking at supposed to be your most recovered part of the day, or nocturnally through night through the use of wearable technology. So back in 2013, when I kind of first used heart rate variability from the consumer state, it was very much first thing in the morning. You get a polar heart rate strap, and you would open your app on your phone, whatever necessary may be, and you would press the timer. You would wait, minute to 5 minutes, depending on what app was utilized. You press save, and you kind of go on your day, and you kind of use that number to track. And now with the sophistication of high fidelity wearable devices, we can now get that completely passively. People don't have to be able to kind of get any type of active state to open their phone, whatever. It's their wearable captures it. They go on their own, they just upload the information, and you're ready to rock, which to me is from a clinical standpoint, significantly of benefit comparatively to do the nocturnal. I know there's pros and cons to each, but from a personal standpoint, I personally look at more the chronic HRV state, making sure that we're building stress resiliency, stress adaptability over the long term for more health and longevity standpoint. And so I primarily do a lot of interpretation of these more nocturnal or longitudinal type of chronic HRV measures.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a very good explanation. And I think for, like you said, the performance populations, the acute measurements, those can be very interesting, right? But probably a different conversation. There's only so many professional athletes, and I feel like a lot of conversations around this topic are already tailored towards athletes, since like most people aren't athletes. So let's just kind of go to the nocturnal.
Mm-hmm.
Should people be paying attention to their average throughout a nighttime, their peak throughout a nighttime? So I have an Oura ring, but many wearable devices are going to be displaying this now. Whoop has it. I think Apple Watch probably has it.
Getting there. Yeah, there's a few. They don't do it as often, so the fidelity piece isn't there. They capture it, but they don't necessarily have a lot of samples from the night. But yeah, they're starting to do as well.
Okay, so which wearables, let's just go there. Which wearables are best for measuring HRV?
Yeah, there's a few that are out there that are doing a good job, and just like the race is happening now is everyone's starting to get up to a pretty high level. There was many issues with wearables during the day, back in the day with all because people would be like, oh, I went for a walk and my Fitbit said that my heart rate was 200 beats per minute and I think I'm having a heart attack, and you would order a stress test and nothing would come up with it, and so there was a lot of problems with that early on. It's there's people coming up and they're getting better and things like that, but the ones that I would suggest, they do a couple things. One is they provide a lot of data, meaning the fact that it's not one or two samples, is they provide a significant amount of data over a period of time. So that's one high level thing. Two is the fact that their numbers hold up in regards to, and they publish a lot of the stuff, right? So they publish out the validity around their numbers versus ECGs, and so they're trying to be able to prove what they do is as accurate as possible. So I like that piece of it as well. The last piece of it is companies that don't hide behind algorithms, where they kind of have this stress marker or this HRV marker, and they don't necessarily give a actual statistic as to what those numbers are, right? So it's harder to be able to determine. I always use the example of, people come up with biological age. Like, oh, I did this test. It said my biological age was 23. I go, okay, well, I need to know what's in that to be able to figure out what to be able to do to make sure that it stays that way or why it's that way. And so you kind of have behind these things. So the three companies that I suggest, and it depends, it's mainly for comfort or kind of utilization. So one obviously is Oura Ring. They've been phenomenal from the standpoint, right from the beginning, in regards to providing high quality data. They provide a bunch of raw data. There's a lot of integration capabilities. They publish a lot of their stuff, and they're trying to be as accurate as possible. I mean, they're not perfect. None of the wearables are, but they're trying to strive to be as big a player as possible. So those are Oura Ring's a phenomenal device in that standpoint. They're kind of the leaders in the data quality from wearable device. Big hesitation for a lot of people is they just don't want to wear a ring, right? So you got to go on that side of things. Okay, well then, what are other type of wearables? One company that I've got to know a lot over the last 10 years, well, not 10 years, probably the last 5 years, is a company called BioStrap. So they were a direct-to-consumer wearable. They're now gone enterprise, more B2B standpoint, but they're a risk-based wearable. And their main concern is about data quality and transparency. That's what they want to be known for. That's what their key is, and more than anything else. And they want to be able to support companies with high-quality data, high transparency, raw interview intervals, all that type of stuff. And so, they strive to be as scientifically relevant as possible. So that's another kind of wearable device that I really like. And last is for people that want a little more functionality, just don't want some sort of, blank thing that they're wearing. They want to be able to tell time, or they want to be able to do that. And so Garmin obviously is at the forefront from the wearable devices. From there, they bought First Beat in 2020. And so they have a significant amount of data set in the back end to be able to kind of validate what they're doing. And I think they're in the forefront when it comes to smart watches. Their standpoints and from our early testing and data analysis from our data scientists, they hold up pretty darn well to the high fidelity wearables that are out there. So they're doing a good job. So it depends really. If you don't like rings, you want wrists. There's to be Oura Ring's best. Again, don't want a ring. Wrists, he's talking about BioStrap. You want more functionality, you go with the Garmin. Those are kind of the big three that I would say right now. But there's so many companies that are coming out now. It's everyone's racing to get in the wearable space.
Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah, so I have an Oura ring because I hate wearing anything on my wrist. So it's funny where you were like, people sometimes don't like wearing rings. I'm like, well, I hate wearing anything on my wrist for an extended period of time. I use a Garmin for running, but is Polar kind of in there with Garmin? Like, I tend to think of Polar and Garmin sort of as like same, right? They've been around forever, but is Garmin better when it comes to these things?
And this is the reason why, is because of the functionality piece. Is the fact that it's like, if you want data quality, you're like, there's other, the wearables that kind of purely focus on that. Not that saying that Polar is bad. Again, we talk about scientific literature, you look at anything to do with exercise physiology or looking at heart rate, you're looking at Polar's right there. That's the number one kind of company in regards to the research aspect of it all. So they're phenomenal. But I think they're kind of geared towards a specific subset of individuals, which is going to be more the kind of triathletes and Ironman type of individuals. Which again is a smaller subset of group. Where Garmin, you have a lot more integrations with different companies and different things you could add into it, like with the Moxie Nearest devices or Dexcom is now integrated with them, and so you kind of get Dexcom information through it all. And so when we talk about functionality, that's where I'm like, well, you got some of the data quality, but you also got the ability to integrate a bunch of different things if you want more of a smart type of watch. So that's where, in regards to data quality, I mean, Polar's always been at the forefront as to what's going on for sure.
Okay. And I have to ask, do you have any conflicts or relationships with these organizations?
No.
Okay, great.
Nope.
So you mentioned companies hiding behind scores.
Yeah.
Whoop came to mind, which is like, it's funny, right? Because like you have to understand what the consumer market is, where it's probably unrealistic for the average person to sift through sleep data, resting heart rate data, their acute and chronic workload, HRV, and be able to come up with a reasonable assessment of how hard they should be able to train today. Whoop gives you a recovery score, a recommendation of like how hard you can train today. So from the consumer side, I can see the benefit to it. But from the provider side, when you can't get the raw data, it's hard to extract what a performance score of 85 means.
Yeah. I completely agree. And this is one of my again, like some of the data quality comes through from what we can see is pretty darn good. But again, they provide a lot of metrics. I just don't know how to interpret them or to make it actionable for people. I really don't. And so, and again, like, you look at the entire business side of Whoop, which I completely understand as to why they go behind algorithms, because it makes them more valuable company if they want to be bought by somebody else, because they have these kind of proprietary type of algorithms with their new stress score and with their old strain score and all that type of stuff, which there's a whole business side, their own interpretation side, and I completely agree. And when it comes to HRV, we talked to this, before we kind of jumped on here, is one of the problems with HRV is obviously its interpretation of what people do. But when you look at the user base of Whoop, is going to be more the physically active athlete type of individuals, which it's more understandable as to what their stress is, which is going to be more about load management and training management than it is about life management, to be able to deal with those things, right? They're hyper-focused in certain areas. And so it makes it a little bit easier to be able to prescribe things, especially if the demographic is more that athlete type of individual, where, go into the biohacking realm or going to in the clinical space, when you're trying to help individuals that are recovering from health or wellness issues, it makes it significantly more complex to be able to understand of how to apply the knowledge of the wearable product, because you need so much more contextual information around that individual.
Yeah, and it's not to talk bad about Whoop. They're a super interesting company, and they're like they do so well in their marketing. They're making this stuff much more approachable for the average person, because it's becoming more commonplace in the vernacular. But I do want to ask kind of about you mentioned clinical sense. I guess when you're talking about the reliability of the data coming off of these, in the past there have been issues, but are we basically at a point now where the volume of data that you're going to get from a consumer grade wearable device like an Oura Ring, for example, is it high enough? Is it good enough where, doing a sleep study is going to be the gold standard, but the availability to do that repeatedly over time, you're still only getting a snapshot. It's a great snapshot, but are we basically at a point now where the volume of data is basically good enough? Not good enough, but do you know what I'm asking? I'm stumbling through this question.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, it's never going to be perfect to a gold standard, right? It's never going to be absolutely to the point. And this is where you got to be able to differentiate between this. I don't think wearables are going to be diagnostic, really. right? In that standpoint, where they'll be able to diagnose conditions saying you have this or you don't have this. They'll provide, associations and correlations between things a little bit better in the real world situation than it is at anything about diagnosis, where, if what you're doing in regards to your behavior change, is it actually benefiting you or no? And this is where I kind of come into the standpoint of people with their, it said my REM sleep was this or REM sleep was that. I was like, hey, well, it may not be your REM sleep, but to a degree, you can probably say the fact that, if your REM sleep went from an hour and a half to, 2.5 hours, right? And you did this stuff, you're probably improved your REM sleep. Right? There's probably your sleep quality is probably improved, right? So it's, okay, great. Like, there's probably some information we can derive from that. But, do I know that they're for a fact have improved by exactly 59 minutes and 22 seconds? I don't know, right? And it's probably never going to be to that point, but it definitely a great, gives some pretty high level feedback. And this is where we use it, because again, when it comes to, say, blood work information, you have to go to a location, you got to get blood done. It sometimes costs money. And so there's certain aspects of it, and you never know when to really do it into that area. And so how we use it, if we ship certain things in regards to nutritional aspects, and we look at this wearable product and we start to see some plateaus or some either regressions or some areas, we know that's the best time to be able to get blood work done at that specific point. It gives us great feedback in regards to when interventions should be changed or altered or assessed or whatever it may be, based upon where the shifts are. Right, we get someone's sleep quality going up, their HRV goes up to a specific point. It goes from 60 to 90. Those throw numbers. Right, hovers at 90 for a couple of weeks. Okay, great. Now is a good time to reassess what's going on and see what the next plan is from there, rather than just arbitrary 3-6 months and just kind of throw, okay, well, now's the time to reassess. It gives us great feedback of the individual responses of somebody to say, hey, okay, like, let's reassess now, to be able to kind of create those changes a little more effectively and efficiently for each person.
Yeah, that's great. So it's not to say that these things are going to replace some of the more, like, the established medical metrics and the more in-depth and reliable metrics that you're going to be looking at, but it is a beautiful adjunct to it for in between, for a much faster feedback loop. The example you gave earlier of somebody who has slightly elevated LDL cholesterol, and then you're checking again 6 months later, and 6 months is not even, it could be a year. Like, if you're young, the response is going to be, we'll check it again in a year. So to have a much faster feedback loop, that's where the beauty, the power of these devices really, really kind of flex their muscle. So can you describe, like, the relationship between HRV and stress? You've already touched on it, but let's start getting into, like, more specific numbers. And because I'm curious for myself, like, what is a good number? I know that's probably a terrible question, but what's a good number for HRV?
Well, which is funny is as I'm starting to get out there a little bit more in regards to space. I mean, I worked with the lead HRV back in 2016, Jason Moore there. It was pretty much the most predominant app that was out there measuring heart rate variability at the time. The most users were using it, and we provided the foundations of HRV course, and so that kind of introduced me to a lot of the HRV community in that standpoint to kind of to build the brand out of it. But as I start to be able to poke my head out a little bit more now, is with some of these things, you start to see some of these numbers that are going up, and I'm like, man, I never see some of these high numbers in individuals, and sometimes I get concerned when I see it that high, because primarily my population has, again, you're talking about chronic pain, you're talking about depression, you talk about anxiety, you talk about people with kind of these conditions. They're historically very, very low in comparison. So the relationship of stress and HRV. So we'll get a little bit of kind of in the physiology aspect of it all now. Is when we're stressed, our sympathetic nervous system is active and our parasympathetic nervous system goes down. What HRV is a good proxy for is our ability to assess the parasympathetic nervous system. So our ability to understand, is our body in a recovery state or not? So that's where that assessment is. It's not a great predictor or understander of the sympathetic nervous system or sympathetic innervation, but definitely can let us know that we're not in a parasympathetic state or we are in a parasympathetic state. So that's kind of the connection between that. Little one layer even further down is it's an independent measure of our vagus nerve. Our vagus nerve is the main controller of our parasympathetic nervous system. When it's active, high vagal tone, there's more parasympathetic innervation to our autonomic nervous system. Our heart rate variability increases, and then obviously as it's withdrawn, where it starts to be able to deal with more of the sympathetic nervous system, or we're dealing with some sort of stressor, vagal tone's removed and heart rate variability decreases. It's very sensitive from that standpoint. So that's the connection to stress in there. And I can't remember now the second part of the question.
If my HRV is 60, is that good?
Yes.
Bad? Fine? Do you need more information?
Great question. Yeah, and this is where, again, like the main thing as we go through these assessments in individuals is that it provides, you have to look at the contextual information. So the medical history, right? If you have diabetes, that's going to impact necessarily the expectations of what I anticipate someone's heart rate variability being. If you have some sort of genetic condition, that's going to impact it. If you so from the physical standpoint, that's going to impact age is going to impact it over periods of time as well. A lot of non-modifiable factors that can impact it. Gender can be able to impact it as well. So all these things we got to go through. And then there's the modifiable factors, right? It talks about your exercise aspect, what your sleep habits like, nutrition. So all these things, and this is where we understand it. So we look at that as to where you're at. So based on some of the non-modifiable things, we have if we have a healthy individual that's meets a minimum amount of physical activity, that's conscious relatively about their food intake, they have no kind of sleep issues or don't require have a lot of stress in their life and lots of stuff. We have these kind of guidelines in regards to that as you start to be able to kind of go down from there. Now, to give very, very rough numbers into this, so we kind of be able to go through it. Individuals kind of we'll say 20 years old, and we'll throw out numbers, and these numbers are the root mean square of successive differences. And so you look at the literature, it's RMSSD is the number. No point in going to the math because I don't even understand it as to what it is, but that's the kind of number that research has shown to be the best kind of proxy for short-term measurements of heart rate variability. When you look at 20 years old, you're probably looking in the neighborhood of a good HRV score is probably in the 80s, right? 30s, 70s, 40s, 60s, and so on, right? All the way kind of way down. You kind of go that type of realm is in the general population, right? And so, but majority of the people that I see, and the more majority of people that are tracking their heart rate variability don't want to be average, right? They want to be above, right? So these are kind of like what you anticipate a normal person being that has no kind of major conditions, that's dealing with life on a normal basis. So you kind of follow that kind of trajectory all the way down into that. So you kind of like hovering, when people are in their 70s and 80s, you're talking about the neighborhood of probably in the HRVs, probably in the 30s. Now, individuals that I see, chronic pain people, people that have depression, they will be 20, 30 years old and have HRVs that are 20, 25, right? I have a colleague that she's pregnant now, going to give birth any time, but her pretty healthy individual, but her HRV was 30 and being pregnant now, her HRV is 12. Right. And it's just like, okay, well, and now I haven't worked with her reverse investigating as to why, but you start to see there's certain things and impacts that can happen to individuals as to what's going on. So that kind of gives you a rough estimate as to what's going on from that standpoint and kind of red flags. And you start now seeing some individuals, we had an individual that he was wearing a Whoop and an Oura ring, right? Not the healthiest of individuals, very successful individual, but pretty heavy partier with various things and not travels loss, all that type of stuff. But one of the things that he does well was being physically active. And so, but he goes, that was seeing, he's like, yeah, my friend's got a really high HRV and that type of stuff, and he thinks he's the man, like super, super high. And so my colleague brings me in, he's like, these results normal, and both. Right? From Oura Ring and Whoop, his average was 250.
Wow.
Right? And I go, he needs his heart checked. Because I've been doing this for over 10 years, over a decade now, and I've never even seen anything close to that.
Yeah, a quarter of a second variation.
Right? And I go, like, there's some sort of heart rhythm abnormality. Like, I'm almost like guaranteeing that's the stuff. Obviously, yes, it was benign, but to a degree, it's like if people have these heart rhythm abnormalities, it's hard to make HRV an actual data point for that, right? And so you start to see individuals that have like 170, 180, 190, it's like, oh, great, I'm so above average. I'm like, that's not normal. Like, to see something above 100 is rare in itself. Like, I've been doing this for a decade. Olympians, high-level athletes, all the way to chronic pain individuals, and seeing something over 100 is extremely rare on a continuous basis, like with nocturnal capture of the stuff, right? In the moment, very different story. But the nocturnal capture. So you start to say that there is that too high realm where it's just like, okay, well, if anyone's kind of above even 120, 130, if someone's above that, I kind of go, I want an ECG on these people because I want to make sure that there's not any type of abnormal rhythm like us.
Okay. Yeah. So it's good to know, because one of my questions is going to be, is a higher HRV always good? I guess the answer is no.
No, exactly. One of the things is I had an individual that didn't tell me, but he had cardiovascular disease and wanted to get physically active. He was kind of in his late 60s. And so we put him on Heart Rate Variability because we're kind of looking at a holistic nature and that type of stuff. And his nighttime average was like 95, right? I'm like, 95? Like that, I didn't expect that at all, right? I go, what's going on? And I started asking him, have an ECG? He's like, oh, yeah. And he's like, I have AFib. He just didn't tell us. Right? I'm like, well, okay. Why was this left out in regards to that type of stuff? It's like, it's not treated. It's just kind of like, I've had a lot of people who was like, oh, yeah, I don't have an ACL in that knee or whatever. It's like, oh, my God. It's like, how did you forget this information? But it's like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. And to a degree, it's like, you like with uncontrolled AFib, any type of uncontrolled type of heart rhythm abnormality, any assessment of heart rate variability may not be as accurate. So you would have to go into some sort of heart rate thing, and depending how bad the abnormality is.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned pregnancy. People who are women who are becoming pregnant, should they, they're tracking this, should they expect their HRV to go down? My guess would be yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, with the added weight gain, the stress of all that type of stuff, and having to be able to keep alive something within the. I mean, it's not as drastic as a decrease as a lot of people would think it would be. I had my wife reluctantly track her heart rate variability through both of our pregnancies, and so there was a drop through it. It's not huge. But there's actually starting to be a lot of research around using wearable products, especially around heart rate variability in body temperature, that actually kind of look at, can they get an accurate prediction of when that baby is actually going to come out?
Oh, that's interesting. What would happen indicating that it might be soon?
Yeah, so you start to see some abnormal fluctuations in regards to increased body temperature and a drastic decrease in heart rate variability.
So interesting, like where things are going to be soon.
Crazy, right? Like some of the stuff you start to hear, I'm like, oh man, like I read some preliminary stuff a few years ago about that type of stuff, but I'm seeing, like, I think it was yesterday morning that I saw this review paper about it all. It wasn't necessarily just one study that was done. It was a review of all the studies that were done around the specific area and using wearables around the prediction of pregnancy. And they're like, yeah, there's some validity to this. And obviously, just like every meta-analysis, more studies need to be done in this specific area. It seems like every conclusion that happens from a systematic review or meta-analysis, but you start to see the trending in that direction where it's like, hey, there's actually some validity here. It's around this, investigating this further.
Yeah. There's so many interesting places we can go from there, but I immediately go to menopause. Is that another place where you would expect to see a drop in HRV?
Yeah, you start again all the hormonal changes. People typically, that's where you see sort of a lot more regulation is people that do the hormone replacement therapy, HRT. If they do that a lot more, you start to see more of a mitigation. You definitely see. So one of the things that I find people going through menopause is not only does HRV go down, but the coefficient variance. So like the fluctuation from day to day, you start to see way more of like if you look at the day to day, like over the time, it's like looks like more like that, like a jag tooth, than it is something that's more of like a nice rhythmic pattern where it's kind of be consistent. So not only do you have the kind of a drop, but one of the biggest changes I see is the coefficient of variance. You get a lot more lows and a lot lower lows than you would over a period of time, and a lot higher highs for some reason. Like you kind of get this all over the place as the body starts to be able to fluctuate of these hormonal changes.
Okay. Yeah, so I could see that being, not that menopause care is like really done really well in this country, but in the future that could be something that would be integrated into that realm. So there's other metrics that come off of wearables. I think resting heart rate, respiratory rate, temperature, total sleep, those are all really interesting numbers. How do you reconcile if HRV is lower than you'd want it to be, but everything else looks pretty good, or the opposite, where like HRV is maybe slightly above where you'd want them to be based on their age range, the rough numbers that you gave earlier, but everything else doesn't look great?
Yeah. So like, where do you go with the wearables?
Yeah. Like how do you reconcile, I guess like discordant numbers from what you might expect?
Yeah, and again, it takes a lot of investigation at this point, right? You have these kind of, again, no individual is the same, and so you start to look at. So we'll just give some examples, right? So say HRV is low, but all the kind of wearable statistics are fine. They're physically active, they have normal body temperature, the respiration is fine. They have no subject to sleep problems in all type of standpoint. My first thing is with this clinic, we always try to do is we got to get blood work done. Right. So the first thing is making sure there's no big red flags, right? Because they could be battling some sort of a low level infection that may not be detectable right now, but our body's constantly fighting it, but it's not necessarily impacting, energy levels or to that standpoint, right? So it's like kind of, talking about the chronic inflammation, the silent killer, which is hypertension. And so there's some things that we can't necessarily detect or feel that's wrong, but underlying that that's something wrong. So you always kind of get the blood work done from that standpoint. But if they're doing all the basic things, they're physically active, they're eating well, and they're sleep, and that's where you got to look at that psychosocial aspect of it all. You got to be able to assess the other aspects of their stress management, connection with people. Are they feeling fulfilled with their life, and kind of deeper into the psychological aspect of the individual a little bit more, and that's where a heavy amount of the work is. A lot of stuff comes out of there from that. For someone that has a normal or higher heart rate variability, and their other metrics seem to be bad, right? So they're not physically active, they have poor sleep, and all that type of stuff. Again, to me, so you always want to kind of rule out red flags. Any type of the big analysis need to be done, whether it's sleep web analysis or deeper in regards to DNA or genetic testing to maybe something explains to what's going on. And then obviously with the higher heart variability, you want to make sure that's completely worthwhile, which we can do very easily an EKG in our clinic here, or if things seem to be even more abnormal, especially on the wearable device, we can do obviously the Holter monitors for the 3 to 5 days to be able to assess those things into what's going on. So if things don't add up, we do our thorough investigation as to why. And to me, there's the easy pieces that there's obviously the objective standpoint and from the physical health or biological health of the individual, and look at those factors. And I want to be able to rule those things out first, because the biggest reasons to why is people come to any type of, I think, situation that's set up like ours, like this type of clinic, the way that it is with many different practitioners that are of the physical, more, that's where we're built on, is more the physical aspect, as people want a physical solution. And until we rule all of that out, it's hard for people to be able to want to work on the social and the psychological aspects of their health and well-being, right? Very different than other way around. It's sometimes a difficult conversation to have. And as a practitioner, you try to be as empathetic as possible, and you try to deliver the news of saying, like, listen, there's other aspects of your health that aren't being addressed, and we need to look at those things. And sometimes it's a hard conversation to have, because they kind of feel judged, that they're kind of judging them, right? The way that they are, like their heads, they feel their head's not right, or they're not dealing with stress well. There's a problem with them. And so they can be quite defensive at that standpoint. So we want to make sure that we kind of rule out all the big stuff first. And if we can do that, then that opens that conversation a little bit more, and especially if we have that holistic assessment. And we start to piecemeal, saying, listen, like, you look at our biological markers. There's only 2 things from here, but we have 8 from the psychological side of things when it comes to these areas. It's like, do you realize, like, we're not putting our effort or time into the right bucket right now? So, like, are we okay? You start to adjust that, and hopefully they find that a value to be able to go forward with it all. I think it's getting more acceptable that that's an area of health that needs to be addressed more and more.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, just to kind of expand on your point of like where you have to start people, it really going to depend on like what their expectation is when they come in. Like, and like, especially if it's the first time you're interacting with them, it's like, you better build that relationship. Like, unless you are just amazing at building rapport and building like a very quick connection with somebody, you're probably going to have to match their expectation for like what the intervention is going to be. And then down the road, you can start working on those hard conversations and sort of expanding their purview of what their definition of health is. And then once that definition is sort of like within their own sphere, then they're going to be much more accepting of these alternative aspects that they need to address.
Absolutely. Right. And that's a really big piece. I remember I had a psychologist visiting from the UK that came to see me based on a referral. And I was kind of going through the speech, and she knew the BioPsychoSocial Model well and talked about, and there's so many psychosocial triggers that were just in this conversation, this history of what's going on and that type of stuff. I'm I know you're here visiting. Well, I'll do what I possibly can, but I'm like, I don't really know you're in the right room. Like, I can do some things. My slice of the pie of your health journey is probably quite small to where we need to be able to do this. And I was trying to explain this. She goes, completely agree. I know this. I just want someone to touch and manipulate, right, for what I'm going through. And I go, and that's the expectation. Like, that's as an osteopath, and that's what it is. It's like people have that expectation of that title that you have as to what type of intervention necessarily is going to be done. So you got to be able to kind of, go with the flow and try to be able to meet their expectations to making sure you're delivering good service. But again, because if I just went completely the other side of things, I'm not doing that and blah, blah, I think that does not do anything to help the individual.
Yeah. You've got to work together, even if you're not doing everything exactly to a T that would get them there fastest, but you have to think about the longevity of the relationship, and what you can do over a much better relationship is going to yield better outcomes long term.
Absolutely.
Can you dig into some of the other metrics? So resting heart rate, respiratory rate, I think those are both very interesting. Do you have general recommendations of ranges? Resting heart rate for sure is confusing because the normal range is 60 to 100. And then below that is technically a medical condition. Above that is a medical condition. But if you're really healthy, you're also probably below 60. Can you unpack that a little bit for people? It's probably confusing.
No, completely. And this is where you have the medical literature. It's what can be relatively past what's going on. And then there's the not disease stage, right, of things. And then there's the optimal stage of things. And this is where I love the trend of the way that functional medicine and personalized medicine is going. It's not necessarily saying, hey, this is the range of disease, right? Or not being a disease versus this is the range that you should be in, which is great, right? I get concerned with people, especially with the nocturnal capture of what's going on. Anything that's above 60 beats per minute in regards to resting heart rate, right? So that's pretty consistent across all age groups, which again, when you look at some of the graphs that are out there, you look at resting heart rate over periods of time, it's relatively stagnant, right? For year on year on year, where you start to see the heart rate variability trend to be able to kind of go down and down and down and down, right? So I don't want anything. I don't want anything above 60. So that's kind of the metric from there. And then as long as a person has from a health standpoint, everything seems to be lining up. Under 40 is okay, but it's rare to be able to see that unless they're absolutely a beast of an athlete aerobically, right? So, you typically run the lowest you see is from healthy individuals that are kind of just generally fit, probably in the mid to low 40s is probably where I'd feel comfortable. Anything below 40, unless again they're an Olympian, you'd be a concern, and you don't want anything higher than 60 in my standpoint for the resting heart rate.
Okay, and what about respiratory rate?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I've had a significant amount of conversations with individuals, other practitioners, and other medical doctors over the time frame around respiratory rate, into how this necessarily plays into what's going on. So nocturnally, it's not. I'm still digging into some of the literature. So what's that? Obviously, lower is better. You want to be able to be in that calm state because obviously slow respiration rate is good, but I've had people with high heart rate variabilities, with high respiration rate, with no abnormalities. I was talking to an individual that was constantly in the hundreds, nothing abnormally wrong, healthy individual biohacker from that standpoint. And she's like, I've done everything under the sun to slow respiration rate down, right? Nocturnally, mouth taping, literally everything. She's like, I can't get it under 18 at all. It's typically 19 or 20, right? High heart rate variability. Everything else has seemed to be relatively fine. I mean, we all have things going on. But a standpoint is it seems to be really fine. I haven't necessarily found a good range in regards to respiratory rate when it comes to these captures of things as to what I would say that would be ideal. But as a general sense, if someone has a respiration rate, it's better to have it lower than where they were than higher.
Yeah, again, so I think it's a really important discussion. The idea, the range is that if you were to just Google what's a good respiratory rate, you're going to get something from the American Heart Association or the American Medical Association or Mayo Clinic or Johns Hopkins, right? And it's going to say the normal range is this, but normal just means not disease state or not sick. And I think people need to start understanding that is true, and then that that range is also not necessarily equivalent with health or healthy or optimal, however you want to think of it.
No, exactly. Like, it's as Dr. Taylor says as well. It's like I'm not sick, but I'm not well, right? There's a lot of individuals that fall into that category into health and well-being, and it's not to the point where it's like there's a medical condition, but doesn't necessarily mean that it's good.
Right. So this is something I've thought about for a while. So when you talk about like the nocturnal average, is that the right term? Okay.
Yeah,
so if you're looking at resting heart rate, for example, your nocturnal average is going to be lower than it's going to be when you go to your doctor's office and you get a pulse. Like,
yes.
Do you have an idea of how much that difference should be? Or is that something worth exploring as well? Sort of your daytime resting heart rate versus nighttime?
Yeah, that's a great question. My view of health is the fact that in the presence of a stressor that has as little impact on you as possible, right? So when people go to a doctor's office, right, and their heart rate is now at 100 beats per minute, like that's not a good thing, right? Like, what is a sign? Like when we know someone's progressing in regards to an exercise program, we do a VO2 max, we do some sort of testing. You start to look at their heart rates at certain intensities, what their RPE is, and rating of perceived exertion is. Look at the various heart rates of various intensity. How do we know someone's getting better? Is the fact that we go at the same intensity, but their heart rate's lower, right? Their body's not under the same demand, under the exact same stressful situation that they were in before, right? So to me, is the faster we can get heart rate up to meet the demand, and the faster we get it down to be more this kind of homeostatic state, to me is a mean of a healthy individual. So to me, it's as little variation under the stress as possible is absolutely the best benefit. You push yourself like crazy and have a relatively, a lower amount of heart rate comparatively to other people or even yourself over a period of time.
Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful. Because I've always known like it's going to be different, but that makes sense that just a smaller gap between whatever your nocturnal or your nighttime average is versus your daytime, that's going to be better. Is there any data around longevity and HRV? Because you mentioned VO2 max. I was like, oh, that's one of the best metrics for an association to longevity, but VO2 max is not a particularly fun test to go through, and it's uncomfortable to like do the mask and all that. So it's not as accessible as something you can just wear on your ring or wear on your wrist. So is there data around HRV and longevity?
Yeah, there's a high association and correlation between VO2 max and heart rate variability measurements, right? So that's where I early on, I used to do a lot of VO2 max testing for individuals. This is before it was really accepted as or people utilize it more from a longevity health span metric, which obviously is now shifting that standpoint. People use it to get to zone training and be able to figure it out and that type of stuff. And I always had the biggest hurdle of athletes who would be recommended to do a VO2 max test with me, and they just didn't want to do it. They want to know what their VO2 max was because they want to be like, oh, I don't want to be the lower end of things because then it's like, I may not get to this race or just psychologically play with me. And so you had those limitations where a lot of people would do it for that standpoint, but didn't necessarily really want to do it. But it wasn't necessarily accepted or well known as a health span longevity metric from there. But there's quite a bit of data out now looking at the association between heart rate variability and VO2 max, and people that have higher VO2 maxes typically have a higher heart rate variability on a longitudinal scale.
Okay. That sort of makes sense, right? You'd be shocked if the data were coming in and it were being like,
totally.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's the thing is look at the adaptations that increasing aerobic capacity does, right? So if people have a higher VO2 max, their ability to utilize oxygen is significantly improved. They typically have great cardiac output and high stroke volumes. And so all the things that are associated with increasing heart rate variability are associated with high VO2 maxes when it comes down to a lot of the physiology crossover. So it would make sense that the fact of people have increased aerobic capacity through VO2 max, and you look at the anatomical and physiological changes that occur, those all enact into having someone having a higher amount of heart rate variability, like lower resting heart rate. Why is lower resting heart rate happen as an adaptation? But that's because you could be increasing the left ventricular size, increasing the contractility, better cardiac output, lower ejection fraction, all these different things that kind of compile into, again, a lot of these kind of, this is back to my exercise physiology days, but a lot of these metrics that we know that it makes, fueling the body more efficient is definitely going to tie into, higher amounts of heart rate variability.
Yeah. VO2 max is one of my favorite metrics for overall health. But again, the barriers to it they're significant, especially, I mean, one time you can convince somebody to do it, but once they go through it, it's harder to be like, you should do this pretty consistently. It's just not
every 6 months. No.
Yeah, it's just not a pleasant thing to do.
No.
But again, the people who are doing it consistently are those athletes, and they're the ones who don't necessarily need that kind of help.
No, not at all. And that's the thing is, I'm guarantee you, if they had a choice in it, they wouldn't necessarily do it either. But it's their coaches and their teammates that are the team to be able to kind of force them to be able to do it, to see where they're at, right? It's not left under our voluntary control. Not a lot of people want to do that, and I can do that with a very high degree of certainty, as being a significant amount of times being a guinea pig in my master's degree, doing these VO2 max tests, that if it wasn't for courses, college credits, I definitely wouldn't be doing it.
Did you ever have to do lactate testing?
No, luckily no. I had to do it, but I never had it done to me, which was good. Yeah, that was nice.
Yeah, just do these sprint repeats until we max out, until we don't see your lactate going up anymore. Super fun.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's the best. Yeah, people are very happy. They sign up in waves in order to be able to get that testing done for scientific research.
You're paying for this. This is your education. So I want to ask kind of about the things that you do for your health. So you're a father of two. Did your HRV drop? At what point is there a threshold where you're like, oh, it's going down below this point? Be like, I really need to dial in and start addressing some things in my life.
Yeah, it's when I first started tracking HRV, it was first thing in the morning, right? And I could artificially increase that subconsciously through respiration, right? So it was that was fine. And then not started to realize this is again one of the benefits of the doctoral standpoint is the fact that I don't have the ability to be able to alter that quite significantly. Yeah, exactly, right? Because again, it's like I try to be science first. I put this on, but I know it's like I think I'm a little bit stressed. So I know subconsciously I was doing something to be able to make sure. And so, with being a father of two, definitely took a hit. In looking at where good numbers for me are versus abnormal numbers, you just have to be more efficient with what you're doing, and you kind of be your own guinea pig. There's many examples that I can provide of things that I do that I know increase heart rate variability and for long-term health is good for me. One of the examples I give is I absolutely despise running. Every step that I take is a reminder that I have to take another step. Like it's that much of a slog to be able to do it. But looking at HRV is one of the most impactful things that I can possibly do, not only for like subjective sleep quality, for my sleep, for HRV, for energy levels, for consistency, with my cognition. Like it's absolutely one of the best things. I've tried cycling, I've tried these other things. It's not the same impact. And so I do it 3 times a week with the fact of doing it, the fact that I know that does that, switching from regular coffee to mushroom coffee. Not the fact that, I'm not going to do it just because science says, because again, science can show that it works for 99.9% of people out there. I may be that 0.1% where it doesn't. And I'm not going to take things blindly without the fact that I know that it actually makes a meaningful difference, or there's a reason for me to be able to do so. So certain things that I know individually for me, if I have 3 nights of bad sleep, that's when HRV crashes. If I have more than 2 alcoholic drinks over a period of time, I know that's when my HRV crashes. Like I know these little things that I know now that impact my health and well-being, and then you throw kids in the mix, and then then all that. And one of the biggest things I had to be able to do is shift my bedtime, right? So I wasn't really a night owl, but I wasn't, I didn't go to sleep at like 9 o'clock like I do now, where it would be like 10:30, 11 o'clock, and wake up at 6 and that type of stuff. But I had to shift that completely to be able to get the stuff I wanted to do done. So now it's like a 9 to 4 type of thing. So I can up and do the things that I want to be able to do and have time for myself. And so it took me about 6 months in order to be able to shift that. Through data, I knew that, both subjectively and objective data, calculating that. Took about 6 months to kind of switch that over. But yeah, for my health and well-being, it's trying to be as consistent as possible with things. Not not restricting things, but not going overindulgent in things, be able to enjoy life, having a beer with a friend. I know it's not the best thing, but I think social connections with that, having one is, for me, is completely fine. For individuals, it may not be, but, there's certain things that I know is fine versus others. A lot of self-discovery over the last 10 years, that's for sure.
Yeah. Do you find that, did you ever get to a point where you felt like all the tracking was becoming an additional stressor and you became too neurotic about the numbers?
Yeah, I take breaks. I absolutely take breaks for a week to 2 weeks at a time every year. I do that with many different things. I do that with exercise. I do that with coffee. I do that with, getting up early. Like there's many things that I do that I take breaks from to kind of just reset, like recharge. To be able to do that, and tracking is absolutely one of those things. The reason why I was stopped tracking for the last week or so, but then one of our teammates had a new device that wanted to be tested, and so I'm usually my company usually calls me the human cyborg, where I wear multiple devices at a period of time. But I absolutely do that. I went to with some friends. I went to Thailand, and I just didn't bring anything. I'm gonna have some fun here, just reconnect, like la la. Came back home. I'd get through the jet lag, and when everything was kind of back in the rhythm, I jumped back on it. Like it was completely fine. So absolutely take breaks. And again, like people get obsessed about having a bad sleep, right? And it's just like, well, yeah, bad sleep, I'll make up for it today. It's just knowledge to me. Like it's more of a warning sign. If I had a bad sleep or my HRV is low, it's like, okay, well then I just have to prioritize recovery today. Knowing that, drink a little more water, make sure that I do a little more breathing practices, making sure that I decrease the intensity of what's going on, just put my body under less stress because it's stress right now. It shouldn't weigh anything on you in that standpoint, but it's, you definitely need to be able to take breaks from the stuff, be able just to live life, enjoy it, and then get back into it. But I think people just, they rely too much on it. It's just feedback.
Can you almost feel it? Like if you don't check your dashboard, whatever device you're using, and you're halfway through the day, can you kind of be like, I bet I'm significantly lower than I normally would be today?
Yeah, most of the time. One of my health areas that I'm not the best in is interception, of understanding my mind-body connection, right? And this is as a former student athlete playing college basketball and having to play through injuries and living abroad for 8 years and a bunch of stuff that happened with it all. I had a relatively, obviously the Irish background didn't help either, of ignoring feelings, but having all these things kind of, come through life, I had to be able to ignore, be able to push forward and be able to perform without necessarily what I'm feeling. And that's obviously, as a short-term strategy, fantastic. Long-term strategy, not so good. And you still fall into those patterns where I relatively have to, try to think of, I have to ignore what I'm feeling and tired, like, screw it, and then just keep going. And so that comes in from time to time, but I'd say now majority of the time, I have a pretty good understanding of the feedback. I'm like, yeah, I probably guess. And I usually don't check my wearable device until I kind of go through my morning routine anyway, right? So I don't actually know what my numbers are until pretty much I'm about to head to work.
Yeah, I think it's very important for people to understand that more data is a tool to better understand and get closer to understanding like what your body is trying to tell you. It should not be used as a tool to exclusively rely. Like you don't rely on your wearable dashboard to tell you how your day is going to be.
No, absolutely not.
That's not a good long-term strategy.
No, I guess the psychological aspect of it all, right? So again, why people don't want to do the VO2 max, don't want to necessarily do blood work, genetic testing, or do MRIs or whatever it may be. It's just like it's the unknown in your face, and it kind of shows you what's going on, and people put absolutely too much emphasis into that. And I try to equate it like, when you have like it's you're not going to have good sleep all the time. Like it's not possible, right? You're not going to have stress-free days. But the thing is like knowing when those things are and knowing to be able to mitigate those things. It's like kind of the weight loss journey for people. Like you could do everything right today and you can weigh more tomorrow, right? You could also do everything wrong today and wake up to be the exact same. Like it's these fluctuations and the ups and these downs, but it's like you need to have more good days than bad, or understand that if you're on a bad day or a non-optimal day, is that like, hey, I need to prioritize me and my recovery today, right? It's just like I gotta take a little more TLC for me, right? Be a little more helping me, be more me focused rather than most people now care about what these people are thinking or what these people are doing and all that type of external stuff. It's like, hey, be a little more internal today. Be a little more selfish. Take time for you. Go for a walk in nature. call a friend to be able to reconnect with, which I did the other day, which felt amazing, which was great. Be able to say, hey, I'm going to focus in maybe cut out a little bit early from work to make sure that I kind of go out and make sure I make a really good dinner and get to sleep a little bit earlier. And it's just about, it's a prioritizing your health. It's just like today's a little bit more today I need to focus on me a little bit more than I have to. It can't be as external or give everybody everything today, because I got to be able to make sure that I'm at my best.
Yeah, I do want to highlight something you brought up a few minutes ago, is the idea of going through phases of monitoring or tracking and then phases of living. I think it's completely unrealistic for people to like put on a wearable device and be like, well, I'm just doing this for the next 5 years. I think it's very important for people to like structure dedicated weeks, months even off where, you're tracking, you can gain some insight, usually probably better with the help of a practitioner to actually tell you what you don't need to do the amateur practitioner side of things, but you get some insights into what that is, maybe make an intervention, try it, and then you need to live for a while. It can become extremely stressful to know that you're this thing monitoring you constantly forever.
Yeah, and it's interesting is that you have this battle of people that don't monitor anything at all and just kind of live life and that type of stuff, and then you do have the Brian Johnsons in this world that literally lives lives in complete public eye of everything that he possibly does and monitor and this and that, which is like, my gosh, like I can't imagine doing that. Obviously his purposes are a little bit are specific, as if kind of the history as to why he's doing it, but it's like that is like, you don't want to be that, right, at all. But you don't want to be completely, oblivious to what's going on. It's like you kind of go these ebb and flows between both of those areas of like, hey, yeah, go live life, like forget about things, like just enjoy it, not know what's going on. The unknown is absolutely phenomenal. To go out there and be able to do it, and then kind of go to the point of like, hey, now's the time to be able to focus on me and where am I at, and go forward from there. But no, you need to be able to take those breaks. People get way too obsessed with this stuff.
Yep, it's easy to. I do want to start wrapping up. I want to be respectful of your time, but you've mentioned breathing a few times, and I think breathing and breath work is a very interesting thing. Kind of going back to the autonomic nervous system, it's the things that you can't really control, but breathing is one of those things that sort of lives in both camps, where you can sort of you can start to manipulate things within your body. So can you speak to some of the benefits of breathing and adopting breathwork practices and mindfulness and meditation? There's a lot that lives in that world.
Oh, absolutely. Right. And this is, one of the things that I think one of the stresses that we have in our life right now is rumination and magnification of issues, right? So we have an issue and it's just constantly on our mind, and we make it much bigger than it actually is, right? Whether it's, confronting a coworker or disagreement with a spouse or financial issues that are over your head. So we ruminate and magnify these problems. And so this constant, and for us to be able to kind of get that down to baseline, make sure that we're not into the sympathetic state. Breathing is not by far one of the best practices. We can make it way too complicated comparatively to a lot of things that are out there. It's like, oh, you need to do, no, you have to breathe in 3 seconds with this nostril and 5 out of this one and hold it for 5. It's like, all right, like, I think majority of the people, if you just kind of do a basic type of box breathing, or even to like a slow cadence of breathing, typically about the 6 breaths per minute is kind of on average for people. If you kind of follow that type of pattern to be able to start with and keep that consistent, that is a huge game changer for a lot of people, right? It's that recognition of peace. And I think the people that value that have the benefit that comes with breathing are the people that do a lot of other things right, but have these kind of like high stress jobs or high stress lives that are constantly in that sympathetic state, and they try to counteract that by making sure that their diet is super perfect, and they're trying to be able to sleep and try to exercise and all these type of things. And so their breathing practices are phenomenal as individuals, but I think one of their big problems is they can't recognize when to be able to do it. And so when I kind of coach people around, when breathing is an intervention that people will do, is almost to a point of like, you have to make it like on the hour, every hour, or whatever it may be. In between meetings, you have to be able to do this type of stuff. So they start to be able to realize like, oh, this is what relaxed feels like, right? This is what it is. Be able to calm down, making sure. And again, it's about not being in that, too out of your homeostatic or your normal state for too long, right? Be able to, what can I do to be able to bring that back down? Standpoint. Breathing is a phenomenal practice that I think is extremely undervalued, not only in the allied healthcare or alternative side of things, but even the medical system. I think it's extremely undervalued as to its its ease and its potential of health when it comes to be able to management of stress, mitigate that stress response, be able to adapt to it much better. That can actually be more of a eustress than a distress.
Yep. Yeah, and it's like anything, right? You can really dive down the rabbit hole, and you can go into the alternate nostril stuff, like you were saying. And there's something there to it. But for most people, like if you're an overthinker or a ruminator, like you're saying, like when you're counting your breaths or you're counting the length of an inhale and counting the length of an exhale, you're not ruminating.
Yeah.
Like, so like it doesn't have to be anything crazy. Just then you'll drift back to those thoughts again and be like, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm paying attention to my breathing. That's what I'm doing for this moment.
Well, absolutely. Right. It's the people that kind of assess about the perfect diet when the fact that like they're doing nothing right at that point. Right. It's just it's one small step. Like you do the basic things first, either with exercise. It's like, oh, I need to this strength days and these lifts and this and that. Blah, blah, blah. No, you're not moving now. Get moving. Right. It's just it's physical activity first. I kind of be able to ramp up. And then if that's not providing benefit, we can start going through those rabbit holes of perfecting various areas for various situations. Right. But I think vast majority of the people, especially like just from the generalized population that aren't in the, the quantification side of things. So like just understanding of how to action very simply some basic breathing techniques that we know can be able to balance that nervous system a little bit more can be a huge game changer for people. Yeah.
Like from the breathwork side, we don't need the whole population to get to a point of very deep transcendence. You don't need to get there. And the same thing on the exercise side. Not everyone needs to have a VO2 max of 60 plus, right? It's like 80% of people in this country don't meet the weekly requirements for the minimum requirements for physical activity. Like, let's stop arguing over the nuances of exercise on the internet and just like maybe mobilize just getting people moving more in general. I think that's a more productive way to kind of collectively work towards something. But before I let you go, do you have anything else you want to add? We've covered a lot. This has been a great conversation from my end. I've always wanted to dig into HRV, so I really appreciate everything you've been able to share with us. But is there anything else that we haven't covered that you feel like you'd be remiss if we didn't get to?
No, I mean the biggest thing is one thing I probably want to share is I think people have more impact on their health than they actually think that they do. Right. So I think a lot of our health and well-being is perceived to be something that people need to fix for us, right? We need to do these medications. We need to be able to see this personal trainer. We need to be able to do this type of thing. We have a significant amount of health agency in our own to be able to kind of create a significant amount of change. One of the things I always kind of bring up in my talks is that 50% of our health outcomes are driven by our behaviors, just what we can control within our day-to-day lives. And that impact. And these behaviors, contribute to like 90% of the medical costs that the U.S. is spending right now in regards to chronic disease management. So we have a lot of health agency wants to be able to control for people. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this whole, host of everything. There's so much information out there of like, yes, okay, we can all eat better. We can all exercise more. We can all sleep more. We can all de-stress. We all connect more with people, right? But it's about chipping away at those specific areas at a time, making sure we're doing the minimum stuff from those areas. Not necessarily optimizing right now, but are we meeting the minimum criteria? And then we can start to dive that rabbit hole. But, I looked at a study where I think it was like 33,000 people were looked at in regards to doing DEXA scans and all type of stuff. And from the minimal health behaviors of being physically active, eating well, and not smoking and moderate alcohol intake, and looked at what's the percentage of the population in the U.S. that's doing that. It's 2.9%. Right? It's like, well, it makes sense. And it's so like the thing is we look at the basics from there, making sure you're doing those things, right? And you have a significant amount of control. You have a lot of power. It doesn't matter where you are in life. You have so much power to be able to kind of make significant amount of change into your health and well-being. It doesn't take a lot to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think it's a great message and a very appropriate one to end on. Kind of the tagline for our company is "Own Your Health." I think that's a very common message in your company as well. And it's so important to kind of put people back in the driver's seat of their own health. I think it's largely a lot of messaging in the past has been, listen to your doctor, listen to this person. I think it's very important for people to understand the message that you just closed with is that you do have a lot of agency and control.
Yeah. And thank you for obviously getting the message out there, with all the people that you're bringing on the podcast and all the stuff that you're doing with all your work. It's like you're we got to be able to spread this message far and wide around this aspect of what people can possibly do and how to best kind of, be their own health advocate and really make some major changes into the health well-being. So thank you and all the stuff that you're doing with this area. It's great work. It's a lot of work. That's for sure. But we have some great people kind of pushing this message forward. So thank you for all that.
Yeah, no, it does feel like I'm very encouraged about what feels like the direction of the country from sort of a health perspective. It feels like a lot of things are trending in the right direction. Oftentimes it also feels like you're screaming into the void, but I think at some point you do end up reaching people, and I do think it makes a difference. So Greg, thank you so much for coming on. You've been a wonderful guest, and I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hey everyone, that's all for today's show. I want to thank you so much for stopping by and watching, especially if you've made it all the way to this point. If you'd like to be notified when new episodes are going to be released, feel free to subscribe and make sure you hit the bell button as well. To learn more about today's guest, feel free to look in the description. You can also visit the podcast website, which is exploringhealthpodcast.com. That website will also be linked in the description. As always, likes, shares, comments are a huge help to me and to this channel and to the show. So any of that you can do, I would really appreciate. And again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.